Women in parts of Europe are being killed, many by partners or family members. So what's being done to stop femicide across the continent? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, violence against women appears to be on the rise across Europe. Instances in Italy are higher than the EU average. So, what's going on there? Roundtable's Jen Carswell has been finding out more.
Every so often, a cultural phenomenon comes along that captures the social consciousness of a nation. Last year, as much of the world was watching the Barbie movie, in Italy, the film There's Still Tomorrow grossed millions of dollars and galvanized a nation. The story follows heroine Delia, who suffers physical and emotional abuse by her husband.
Se può sapere che c'è in quella testa vuota te? Sta zitta. Mannaggia.
It was so significant that the Institute of the Italian Encyclopedia Treccani chose femicide as 2023's word of the year. Broadly speaking, it's defined as the gender-based murder of a woman or girl by a man, usually someone she knows. Last year, 120 women were murdered in Italy. That's about one woman every 3 days. More than half of them were killed by ex-partners or partners. A few weeks after the release of There's Still Tomorrow, the issue of femicide became mainstream after the killing of 22-year-old university student Giulia Cecchettin. She was allegedly murdered by her ex-boyfriend. Thousands protested. It is really difficult to get an overall picture of the problem across Europe because the reporting can be patchy and inconsistent. The total number of femicides from 2010 to 2021 is estimated at over 3,200 in the 20 countries that report such data. But the EU Statistical Office recorded nearly 6,600 intentional homicides of women over a 10-year period. So that would suggest significant underreporting by nations. And conviction rates are low. Data from Greece, for instance, showed less than a quarter of men charged with domestic abuse offenses were convicted. There are NGOs and state organizations out there helping to keep women and girls safe and trying to bring perpetrators to justice. But the picture, frankly, is bleak and probably worse than we even realize. So what needs to change to bring femicide to an end?
Well, let's meet our guests. Joining us from Milan in Italy is Silvia Boccardi. She's a journalist who's done a lot of work on social equity. Also in Milan is Ilaria Baldini. She's a frontline worker and a board member at CADMI, that's an NGO, providing shelter and resources for abused women in the city. And in Fort Collins, Colorado, in the United States, we have Julia Khrebtan-Horhager. She's an associate professor of communication studies and a director of education abroad programs in Italy. That's at Colorado State University. You're all very welcome to Roundtable. Silvia, I'll come to you first. This is a side of Italy that the tourists don't see, the international media only cover occasionally when something terrible happens. It is really a shame for Italy that this is happening.
It is, yeah. And the reason why feminicides, but not only in Italy, let's be clear, continue, and more generally violence against women continue, is because there still persist gender asymmetric models. So it is a phenomenon that refers to a male model that is characterized by an idea of superiority towards women, or power or legitimacy to do what they want of the women with whom they are or with whom they have some relationship anyway. So yeah, this is of course a terrible phenomenon that is still very, very bad in Italy as elsewhere.
Ilaria, every time there's a killing that makes the headlines across Italy, occasionally a killing in Italy makes global headlines. Every time this happens, there are calls for change. We hear the words "never again," and yet nothing much ever seems to change for Italian women.
I think we need to look beyond the surface We have all these episodes and they make the news. Under the surface, there's it's like a big iceberg, and it's all the women that actually do get out of the situations because there are answers that come from far away in time when the movement, the women's liberation movement, made violence emerge, and since then things have changed. Not so much in terms of culture, so we need to apply the laws differently. But there are answers now, and in our centers we see women younger and younger that come to us, and they don't wait long before they realize that they are in a situation that is dangerous for them. So they call us, we do a risk evaluation immediately, and a project starts with the woman, with our methodology that is a feminist methodology of believing her, listening to her, and creating a project of freedom with her.
Giulia, I noticed that a woman is killed in Italy almost 1 every 3 days. The statistics are absolutely shocking.
Yes, they are. And as my colleague said, it's not just an Italian problem, it's patriarchy and misogyny are universal, unfortunately. What happens in Italy is devastating, but it's not to say that it doesn't happen everywhere else. And in many, many regions of the world, if we think critically, things are even worse when we think about, for example, honor killings, when we think about what's going on in Iran, for example, right? We have this absolutely normalized culture of patriarchy. We have this culture of misogyny, and we are working very hard to combat the issue, but things are not perfect. What can we do to change things in Italy? We can continue addressing the subject, but also making sure that it's not just the narrative of the victim that comes out, but also that we do not just talk about it as a matter of factly, but we address the root causes of it, that we address also not only the laws, but the fundamental attitudes, the culture, the education. At times, religion has impact on how we see very gendered, normalized dynamics, media, and many other factors. So if we look at this holistically, it makes sense, yet we need to continue doing better.
One murder that horrified Italy last year was that of Giulia Cecchettin, a young student whose ex-partner is on trial this year, accused of her murder. Let's have a listen to some of the people who attended her funeral and what they had to say at the time.
This story really shocked me. It's terrible to see a young woman who had her whole life ahead of her die like this.
I felt it was my duty to be here today, to honor all the 105 women killed this year.
I almost feel like I know her. She seems like the face of some of my clients, the face of some of my clients' daughters. Giulia really made me feel sorry for her. That's why I came to the funeral, since I could be there. I got up at 5 to find a place in church, and here I am.
Silvia, as I said, every now and then one case hits the headlines and dominates conversations, but the case of Giulia Cecchettin really hit home with a lot of Italian women in particular.
Yes, I think the case of Giulia Cecchettin has been particular because she was, as everyone, and especially as the media, called her a normal girl, right? So she was a girl who was going to school. She was a very young girl. They have been depicted as the couple who was in love, and maybe we'll talk about the language of femicide later, which is very often very wrong in Italy. But it's not just that. It's also, I think this case was important because for the first time, we've heard part of the family talking, addressing the roots, as my colleagues were saying, addressing the roots of the problem. So it was just not talking about the loss that they were inflicted, but also about the fact that this man, we'll see if he's going to be charged of the homicide. I mean, of course, there's a trial going on, but of course, I mean, this guy was not a monster. And this is the first time that we hear part of a family of someone who was killed as a femicide for being a woman, talking about patriarchy, talking about terms that are very difficult for people to understand and for people to accept. This is why I think Giulia Cecchettin murder has been so big in Italy. But we don't have to forget that most of the women that are being killed in Italy are not young girls. They are women, usually over 40 or 50, and sometimes they don't even make the headlines because they're not interesting for the media enough. And we have to remember that.
Ilaria, how prevalent is domestic violence in Italy? Would you say it has more of a problem with domestic violence than, say, neighbouring countries?
I think it was said also by Giulia and Silvia that Italy is not an isolated case. There may be differences in numbers, but it's patriarchy, the problem, and patriarchy, unfortunately, is international. It is really a war on women that has, it assumes different aspects. The numbers may vary, but Italy is within the range of other countries in terms of how often it happens. So it is prevalent in the sense that, yes, it is all over the culture, and what we see, what makes the news is only the tip. And this is why the change has to be a deep change, and we work for that. So we see every year about 650 women, and the number, may vary a little bit. It is increasing when we can give, as the more answer we can give, the more the number increases. So this gives us a sense of the fact that we give the answers and we can solve the problem. We don't find the answers that have to be very concrete, and also have to tackle the whole culture. And then we don't see the phenomenon. So it's very important that there are answers for women so that we can face it and solve it, hopefully. And it is, I agree, a matter of patriarchy. So it's something that's ingrained, and it's a continuum of things that happen. What we see in domestic violence is what happens within the family, within the intimate relationships. But then there are all sorts of other violences that concur into making it difficult for women to exit violence.
Giulia, I've always thought that Italian men seem to idolise their mothers, and the mothers idolise Italian sons in particular. And yet there's this deeply ingrained in Italian life of domestic violence, where you've got men who will shower their mother with flowers and chocolates and compliments and then beat the living daylights out of a partner. It's very strange.
But is it really? Because, well, there is this stereotype. There is even a word for it, mamone, like mama's boy. But a mother is a person who gives unconditional love to a child. A mother is a person who cooks and cleans and takes care about a child, right? And if a partner is different, if a partner wants emancipation, if a partner wants equality, then the immature person would not always be willing to accept the new reality. And that's, I think, that the most kind of paradoxical thing is that we have a lot of domestic violence coming from partners who very often are not mature enough to accept women's agency, to accept their decisions. If you look at the recent cases of femicides in Italy, but also in many other countries, but in Italy specifically, typically those are cases of murdering of women who decided to get a divorce, start a new life, move on with their lives. Like, for example, Giulia Cecchettin, who was graduating earlier than her ex-boyfriend, who decided to end that relationship, who had graduation in mind. So it's this it's this kind of clash of agencies, right? So when a woman has agency, when she's emancipating, she needs to move forward with her life, and the partner doesn't accept it, and the partner stays in this mental condition of a child, or even worse, a teenager who idolized his mom, but is not willing to accept a partner with desires, with ambitions, with agency, with voice. We have this classic clash.
Silvia, I want to talk about the film that we mentioned in our reporter's report earlier on. Jen Carswell mentioned C'è ancora domani, There's Still Tomorrow. Broke all the box office records in Italy, getting rave reviews. How important a piece of film is that to get it into the Italian narrative and mainstream, that people are going to cinema to watch a film which is ultimately about domestic violence?
I think it is very, very important. And I really think that this movie has portrayed in a way that people that have been, close to these topics, they kind of knew it already, right? So we know how it works. We know, as for what Julia was saying, that there is usually this clash of agencies this idea of a woman being a property of the man. But for this to be portrayed in every cinema in the country and even abroad is very, very important, because we need to face and to see and to watch this behavior. The idea of making it in the 50s in a way helps not feeling too attacked for men, because usually that's a problem, right? We have this idea of for men to reply to what happens as not all men, right? Not every man would do that. And to that, we will have to respond that we're happy for that. Of course, not every man would kill, their wife or their partner, but we have to work on those men and on that culture that bring those men to do that kind of horrific things. So I think that movies and pieces of movies and documentaries and every manifestation, every protest, everything that we can do for people to understand that this is not an isolated phenomenon, but this is like the system that we work in and that we live in is fundamental to change what's happening right now in Italy and everywhere else also.
Ilaria, it's interesting that this piece of film is having more power and more influence than lawmakers, police, politicians, judiciary.
I have to, in a way, agree, because I think what the movie does is it goes to an emotional level. It speaks to everyone. For example, not everyone reads Virginia Woolf about the relationship of the war at home and the war in the state and in politics. But to see the relationship between the rights of women in the end of the movie and what happens in the home, or the relationship for history itself and the change that the freedom of women can give to change the course of history, I think was something that she was able to put in front of everyone. So I hear that boys listen, and we need to go beyond teaching a lesson. For example, at our anti-violence center, when we go in schools and we do training, prevention, or in companies and institutions as well, we bring our experience. And so we break the barrier of the fact that we're not teaching a lesson about violence, but we enter in a relationship. Relationship is our method of working with women, but also of working with anyone who wants to understand from us. So we open our center to people, and we show what we do. This tend to change the way people think about it. They start to move away from the rational part that makes them digest certain stereotypes about, I'm not just talking about gender stereotypes about the victim. We don't like to use the term victim. It's not a destiny to be a victim for a woman, but it is a situation that is related to all the things we were all three talking about. And it is norms that are inherited, transmitted, and we need to challenge. And we need to do it in a way that, again, it's not a lesson. To change culture, laws are important. And through changing culture, we change the laws. In return, we need to have an open ability to discuss, to talk to each other, to stay in relationship, and to realize that this has an impact on all of us and ultimately on democracy. Patriarchy and democracies are not compatible, really.
Julia, that film is set in 1946, which was the year Italian women got to vote. And here we are in 2024. It's hard to believe that the themes that have run through Italian life for, 8 decades are still there.
What is it really? If you think about patriarchy very critically and about power in general, how passionate are those who hold power to give it up? How willing are those who have privilege to voluntarily give it up? I currently work in the United States. How many female presidents did we see in the country where the population is slightly larger in terms of females, right? So if we think about the film, I think it's one of the most powerful messages it sends is that not much has changed since the the years of the so-called neorealismo in the Italian cinema. And that's what probably makes it so powerful, that it's so incredibly relatable.
Silvia, that's a good point about leadership. I mean, Italy now famously has Giorgia Meloni, first female leader in the country, seems from the outside to be doing very well, and yet she has distanced herself from the Italian feminist movement. Why is that?
Well, if you think about the kind of women that usually hold power, they are usually women that are not feminist, as my colleague was saying. And this is for a couple of reasons. First of all, women that hold power are usually elected by an electorate that is mainly rooted in this patriarchal system. So it's very difficult that you will find women on apex role that are usually pro sort of feminist stances, because they have been elected by an electorate who is in power because of that patriarchal system. And this is one. Second, being feminine doesn't mean being feminist. So being a woman leader doesn't mean that you're actually able to assist and help and support women around you. And this is something that we see very clearly in our government. So I wouldn't. It's just like there are two different things. One is being a woman, and another thing is being a feminist. Even a man can be a feminist, but they are two different things. I think that this government has, in a way, kind of decided to put pressure on women to make children, to have children. So they focus on family, but focusing on family, they kind of forget sometimes that woman doesn't mean family, and family doesn't mean woman.
Ilaria, can you see life getting better for Italian women under Giorgia Meloni then?
Well, I have to agree very much with Silvia. Unfortunately, being a woman doesn't mean being feminist. For example, talking about the pressure to make children, very recently a law has been approved by which pro-life organization can go and approach women who have already decided to get an abortion. And as if that were not a difficult enough decision for a woman, and as if there were not enough pressures within society to make her feel guilty for something that she should not feel guilty about, because it's a decision about herself. So having values in the electorate that are very traditional is exactly the opposite of what we need in order to see a diminishing of violence against women, because we need to see a transformation in society that Silvia was mentioning. It's a certain kind of women that get elected more. Perhaps it's because, or maybe certainly it's because they do not challenge the order of things that is based on certain norms that are imposed on men and women. And it becomes a psychological problem for society. So it's a disease of society that that makes suffer both men and women, and of course then creates a kind of hierarchy that puts all men above women. And I don't think that is being challenged. The kind of laws and the kind of values are actually going against what feminism would like to see, to find a real solution to the problem of relationships among men and women.
Thanks, Ilaria. Julia, final question to you. Final question to you, Giulia. Can you see life getting any better for Italian women having an Italian Prime Minister as a woman?
Well, you can say de facto seeing a woman in a position of leadership can be inspiring, but I agree with my superb colleagues that this is not necessarily the feministic leader. But I do think seeing more female leaders in general is a good trend, and it's very difficult to be even electable as a woman in the position of power. And what I also think is that we should not just focus our conversation as a single story of Giorgia Meloni, but we should also make sure that we do not apply double standards to our political leaders. Because Giorgia Meloni she's a controversial leader in many ways. A lot of people are very fond of her. Many people critique her. But I do believe that when we talk about patriarchy, when we talk about misogyny, we shouldn't just celebrate the legacy of Silvio Berlusconi and glide over the bunga bunga parties and glide over a lot of things that were dramatic and that were very damaging for a lot of women, and we just don't talk about it. So I think when we want to have a positive change, we need to hold women and men accountable and to equal standards of ethical behavior.
Giulia, Ilaria and Silvia, thank you all so much for your insight. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for Roundtable TRT World, and if you like what you see there, please do hit that subscribe button. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.